I've tried to explain this to my fellow U.S. Americans by bringing in comparisons, because most of them haven't even heard of General Soleimani, who's really the greatest military figure of the 21st century. And people in the region know that, but here in the United States, we don't know much beyond our borders. So I've been trying to make these comparisons to say, well, imagine if in 1946 Stalin had, on the very same day, managed to succeed in assassinating George Patton, Douglas MacArthur, and Dwight David Eisenhower. Just imagine how the United States would have reacted. The American people would have demanded the destruction of Stalin and the Soviet Union, and they would have probably been willing to embark on a very long-term project to make sure that happened, and they would have been willing to sacrifice quite a lot. But even that comparison doesn't do justice to this situation, because for all of their heroism in their legendary defeat of an enemy portrayed as the embodiment of absolute evil in World War II, which is where the popularity of those generals came from, General Soleimani has not only defeated a genuinely absolute evil, that is Daesh and their Zionist friends, but he also is a very pure, holy, and pious man, quite unlike those American generals, and has that religious dimension in a culture that is taught that martyrdom is the highest possible state. That, all Muslims, and I'm one, know that the best possible death is a martyr's death. Fighting, struggling to defend your people against an unjust, aggressive tyranny. And so the resolve, not only of the Iranian nation, because General Soleimani was not only loved and respected by all Iranians, essentially. The polls show he was by far the most popular figure in Iran. Whatever people's views on all kinds of other issues in Iran, even the tiny minority that still likes the Shah, which is, you have to look pretty far in Iran before you find any of them, even those people love Soleimani. Everybody in Iran loves Soleimani, but not just in Iran, all across the region. He was very popular in Iraq, despite the rant-a-mobs that the Americans brandished. He was very popular elsewhere. He's very popular in Saudi Arabia. Sure, the leaders don't like him, and the brainwashed Wahhabis don't like him, but ordinary people throughout the region admire this guy because both he's Islamically very pious and pure, a warrior monk, a strategic genius. He won a victory, and now he's been martyred by what can we call people like Trump? I mean, Trump right now is, he's probably doing this because there are pictures of him and Jeffrey Epstein raping little girls. There are all sorts of very credible allegations about Trump having raped and sodomized a 9-year-old with Jeffrey Epstein. That's almost certainly true. Trump's other similar activities with Epstein include all kinds of allegations, courtroom filings, and so on. So Trump is owned by the Jeffrey Epstein's owners, namely the Zionists. And so probably they would have ordered this. And Zionists never stop at seeking trouble. But look at the contrast here. Trump, the biggest liar, more lies documented than any other leader in all of world history, the man who was absolutely loathed by more than probably about 150 million Americans, according to the polls, absolutely hate Donald Trump, and for good reason. His moral stature as a psychopath and a narcissist is below sea level. It's just, he's already basically a demon in hell in the eyes of almost every educated person in the world.
It's interesting, Kevin, that you're talking about from the moral perspective, and also that basically the Zionists own him. When he was making his speech, actually, to the media, of course, he didn't take any questions. He was saying one thing, very strong and firm, that it was good what the United States had done, and it should have been done a long time ago. But I can tell you, his voice and his facial expression, there was fear. It was as if these are the words that he has to say, but there was definitely fear in his eyes, and his voice was shaky. So it definitely seems that he is perhaps in a position that basically perhaps he has no choice but to do what he does because he is owned. But in general, Kevin, I want to look at the one aspect of this. I had talked to Mimi earlier about it. I want your perspective because there are so many people that are talking about, you know, Trump is insane and he did this. I mean, is this Trump? Is this unilateral Trump? Or is this the United States? I mean, if we look at the United States from Bush onwards, or prior to that even, we're looking at an economy that's based on war and destruction. Your take, is this something that if Trump wasn't in office, perhaps it wouldn't have happened? Because even some of the politicians, Democrats too, that have been asked, they say, yes, he needed to be killed, but perhaps it wasn't the time.
Well, the Democrats are also owned by the Zionists and the military-industrial complex. Everybody of any significance, William Colby said, is owned by the CIA. Anybody of any significance in the media is owned by the CIA. That was William Colby. But he should have added that the media outlets are all owned by people who are ethnically Jewish and have different degrees, but still always some degree of loyalty to the genocidal state of Israel that's occupying Palestine. So between that and the military-industrial complex, the war lobby here in the United States is extremely powerful. That said, I'm pretty sure this whole situation would not have arisen had Trump not been inserted into office by the Kosher Nostra organized crime cabal, Sheldon Adelson, the mega group of Zionist billionaires, Les Wexner, who was Jeffrey Epstein's bankroller and sugar daddy for the Mossad. These extreme right-wing friends of Bibi Netanyahu have been dying, literally dying, probably, for a war on Iran. Now, Bibi Netanyahu is about to go to jail in Israel, and the only way to save himself is through a big war. So I think there's a faction here, a criminal faction, probably the same faction essentially that blew up the towers in Building 7 on September 11th in order to launch this U.S. war on the enemies of Israel. And if that faction hadn't come to power by inserting their owned boy, Donald Trump, who started out as a sexual plaything of Roy Cohn, the notorious pedophile in New York, who ran New York for the mafia, ultimately answering to Meyer Lansky, the ethnically Jewish head of all organized crime at the time, who gave orders to J. Edgar Hoover, who passed his orders to Roy Cohn. So Roy Cohn was the mafia kingpin who ran New York when Donald Trump was getting his start. And look on the internet, you can find pictures of basically Roy Cohn walking Donald Trump around with a studded collar at these sick, degenerate, gay parties. That's Donald Trump. He was the boy toy of Roy Cohn, the Kosher Nostra criminal. And so obviously that's the same circle that Jeffrey Epstein runs in. This is who Donald Trump is. They inserted him into power to get this war on Iran that they want. And had Obama, famously, who hated Netanyahu and who was hated by Netanyahu and who had around him a number of people like Zbigniew Brzezinski who actually care about the United States, not the state of Israel. Obama would never have done this. Hillary Clinton, I don't know. She and Bill Clinton are hanging around with Jeffrey Epstein and these Zionist criminal factions, so who knows what Hillary would have done. But there are different factions here in the U.S., and yes, they're all evil. All of the factions in power in the United States today are part of Hizb Shaitan, the party of the devil, but there are different factions of that party. And right now we have a psychotic faction in power, and maybe that's good because they're going to lose their empire much sooner rather than later.
Okay. Well, Mimi, I want to switch topics a little bit and looking at, of course, even prior to General Soleimani's death, the United States and other Western countries continued to demonize him. And now, in his death, his martyrdom, we see a situation with people showing their love and respect to him all over the world. Social media, I want to look at the social media aspect of this. I have been contacted by so many people in different parts of the world and sending me even screenshots of their accounts that have been blocked, that have been basically, there are many that were on Facebook. They no longer have an account on Instagram, on Twitter, and some of them just for simply putting a picture of General Soleimani or a few sentences talking about the biggest fighter against terrorists, the most victorious person in fighting terrorism. I don't know. Do I have Mimi? Is Mimi still with me? Okay, I guess not. Well, Kevin, I'm going to throw that back at you. And looking at the social media attacks, it has been unbelievable what have taken place the last couple of days, and the number of people who have gotten warnings or have had their accounts deleted because of honoring this person who fought against terrorism.
It's absolutely disgusting. And again, it shows that big social media in the United States is owned by Zionists who are loyal to the genocidal entity occupying and destroying Palestine. They're not loyal to the United States of America. We should add quickly that the propaganda here in the United States that General Soleimani was responsible for the death of all sorts of Americans and he was planning to kill millions of Americans, this sort of insanity actually turns the real situation on its head. General Soleimani was very cooperative and reasonable given the circumstances in terms of his dealings with the United States throughout his entire career. If anything, if General Soleimani has to answer to God for anything, it would be that he didn't kill enough Americans, or maybe didn't kill any. He worked with the Americans, and I think God is going to ask him, about that. That's maybe the one thing that he did that wasn't quite right. But so he was really a quite reasonable partner for anybody, even including the United States. But of course, he wasn't going to settle for the genocide of Palestine, and he was bravely going to fight for the rights of the dispossessed. And of course, he was fighting for his country, God and country. And the idea that social media, supposedly run out of the United States, but against American interests, is blocking anybody who is putting up tributes to General Soleimani is just so completely disgusting. And it shows that we have a terrible problem with what's happened to the internet, which in the first decade of this century was a place where a certain amount of truth could be told, and the American guarantees of freedom of speech written into our First Amendment were essentially respected, even in the wake of the Zionist False Flag 9/11 Act, which was designed to, and then the anthrax sent to the senators to force through the Patriot Act to turn America into a bit of a police state. It wasn't that much of a police state, but today it is. Today it's a complete police state. And I think that appropriate retaliation for the death of General Soleimani, which isn't necessarily going to come from Iranians, because tens, if not hundreds of people around the world love General Soleimani and or have a strategic interest in making sure the United States can't run around murdering people like this. Probably there are people with capability to do an attack without a return address that would utterly take down the internet here in the United States. And that would have just immeasurable damaging consequences on the economy of the United States, and nobody could prove where it came from. This is the sort of thing that I think what Iran needs to do, and not just Iran, but all of the supporters of General Soleimani all over the world, and there are tens of millions of us, we need to think about what we can do. Both Iran can do something that it will claim in order to satisfy the necessities of doing something in public, and that should be a measured response, and it should be proportional. But then there should be everyone who is outraged by this criminal act can help enforce international law by making sure that the consequences of this act, by way of these non-return to sender kinds of ways of wreaking absolute havoc against the criminals that did this, everybody must dedicate themselves to making sure that the consequences of this criminal act are felt in the halls of power among the people who are responsible for this act.
Well, let me just review some of what the leader of the Lebanese resistance movement, Said Hassan Nasrallah, said. He said that there will be just punishment. A crime has been committed. And he says that actually he talks about the worth of Qasem Soleimani, that 1 foot of his is worth the whole American military. And then he also talked about Abdul Mahdi al-Mohandes. He said thus, with the taking of their lives, U.S. presence and posts in the region, U.S. warships and every single general and soldier in our lands are a target in the region, and he reiterated this is not about the American people. No innocent people would ever be threatened. We are not terrorists. We fight against terrorism. But at the same time, the U.S. military must leave this region. Your thoughts, Kevin?
Well, that's beautifully put. And that will be the outcome of this. One way or another, this will be seen as the death knell of U.S. power in that region. Whether it happens quickly, if Trump were smart, he would pull out very quickly so that in the upcoming election campaign, he won't be seen as responsible for horrific disasters spreading rapidly through the United States and around the world. But maybe not. Maybe it will take longer, in which case the disasters will cascade one upon another. But in any case, it's absolutely correct that there is such a thing as proportional retaliation, and there is such a thing as avoiding terrorism. Terrorism is defined as intentionally targeting civilians to spread fear. And the government of Iran and its friends in the region are not terrorists because they don't do that. The Americans do to quite a substantial extent. The Americans consciously choose military policies and strategies and approaches, tactics and so on, that kill enormous numbers of civilians. The death toll since 9/11 in these wars of civilians, according to Dr. Gideon Palya, leading expert on avoidable mortality, is about 27 million murdered, and then another 5 million would have been born, but their parents were murdered. So a total of 32 million Muslims are missing around the world. That's a holocaust of civilians pursued consciously as a direct strategy of terrorism by the United States of America. Iran and its friends in the region don't do that. However, when a crime like targeting General Soleimani is committed, of course there's going to be proportional retaliation against similar military targets, and perhaps such retaliation needs to be a bit bigger than the original strike. Imagine if this had been done to the United States, if a top U.S. general in an airport in Canada had been murdered by some hostile country. I don't think the United States would be satisfied with just killing one general from the country that did it. I think there would be a lot more hell to pay, and in this case, there certainly should be.
Okay, thanks so much, Kevin. Let me switch back over. I guess, Mimi, I have you now because I was talking to you a few minutes ago. Are you with me, Mimi?
Yes, I can. I am.
Okay.
Do you hear me?
We keep losing each other and regaining. But anyway, Mimi, I had mentioned to Kevin, but I had wanted you really to address the social media aspect and what we're looking at. Unbelievable targeting the last few days of so many accounts. People who are talking about what has happened, people, some of them who simply put up a picture of General Soleimani or a few lines that they have been banned, some of their accounts have been deleted, or at the very least they have gotten warnings. I can tell you my own Insta page, I experienced the same thing, and I was said that if I persist, if I put one more post inciting violence, that my whole account would be deleted. It's quite unbelievable the amount of censorship that's taking place in dealing with this subject.
Absolutely to be expected, I suppose, because these platforms are owned by the enemy. They are owned by Zionists, especially Facebook. It's owned by Zuckerberg. Twitter has a bit more leeway because it's owned by Jack, but again, there's a lot of tentacles being spread there to censor more and more people. And right now, the Syrian president's Twitter account has been banned off Twitter, which is very foreboding. I mean, this is the president of a nation. What he says is supposed to be very important and is newsworthy, and Twitter has justified the existence of Trump's Twitter account, even though he's violated a lot of their rules, by saying that it's newsworthy, and yet they have just banned Syria's president's account. So we're
I
going
mean,
to
just doesn't it show the hypocrisy, the pure hypocrisy of what is going on? On the one hand, talking about continually speaking about freedom of speech, and even Mimi not being able to handle a picture of someone who's not just should not just be a regional hero, but a global hero for any freedom-loving people of the world. The world was terrorized by the images of the liver-eating, head-cutting Daesh terrorists, and this is the man that helped save the world from those terrorists.
The hypocrisy is astounding, and they haven't even worked very long to create the propaganda zeitgeist in people's minds to justify any of these actions. As the war progresses, as the US empire gets more and more desperate, you will see more censorship, and it's truly just a sign of weakness, because if they can't stand a photo, then really their position has become very precarious.
Yeah, you brought up an interesting point there, Mimi, about the weakness of the U.S. regime. Let me just stay with me, Mimi. Everyone, you're looking at these live images out of Tehran, where so many people have gathered. You see the sign saying, "We are all Soleimani," and this has been something that's going around in Iran and Iraq, young and old, and people are saying, especially younger people, "We are all Soleimani. We will follow in his footsteps. We will continue his way." And unbelievable numbers there in Tehran and also in Mashhad, where, of course, the bodies are still trying to reach the shrine of Imam Reza, and it has been a very, very slow procession because of the sheer numbers of people who've turned out in the streets of Mashhad, that actually the bodies are now supposed to be at the commemoration program in Tehran, but still so far they haven't even reached the shrine of Imam Reza in Mashhad. Expectation beyond expectations, the number of people that have turned out and showing their love, showing their respect for their heroes, those who fought against terrorism, those who kept the country and the region safe, those who should be admired globally, but on the other hand are condemned by some. Kevin, I want to look at just in general, I mean, when we see or we follow some of the news articles coming out of the United States, and still when they're talking about the man who terrorized the world, how is it possible for Americans? I'm asked this question a lot, I can tell you, here in Iran. When I tell people, the American people, they do not know the reality. And they ask, how can they not know when you have access to so much information, when there's the internet now? It's easy to find out. What's your take on that?
People here in the United States are some combination of too busy with their lives to take the time to really look into things and how they work, and also perhaps at some level they understand that if they did take that time and they actually learned how things work, the result would be either so disabling in terms of how depressing it is, if you're a U.S. American citizen who would like to think well of your country and your government, or it would actually imply a responsibility to do something to change things. So I kind of understand why fallible, weak, not necessarily terribly intelligent Americans continue to shuffle through their sleepwalking lives, shopping at Walmart and watching mainstream media and maybe not fully rejecting it and not going and finding out what's really going on from the alternative media. I kind of understand why they do that, but at the same time, there really are no excuses. And in fact, I think most Americans no longer really do buy what they're getting from the mainstream media, or from Trump for that matter. And in fact, the people who doubt the mainstream media the most tend to be the Trump supporters, and vice versa. So nobody is really united around believing anything here in the United States anymore. The facts and the reality-based community were really destroyed by the false flag deception of September 11th. And since then, the U.S. has been sleepwalking through a kind of a matrix pseudo-reality. And today, the doubts about what we're getting from the mainstream media are off the charts. Historically, there's never been a situation like this, where, for instance, the meme, Epstein didn't kill himself, has gone viral, and the entire country, if not the world, knows this, and essentially all of them believe it. They all know that Epstein didn't kill himself, and yet the mainstream story is that he did. So this is the biggest single sort of popular cognitive uprising in American history. I don't think ever before has there been a situation where the official version of things, as purveyed by the political institutions and the mainstream media, has been as, if not utterly rejected, at least as held off at extreme arm's length. Basically, everybody in America knows that Jeffrey Epstein was either spirited out of prison to a penthouse in Tel Aviv, or more likely, he was probably just murdered. And so we all know this. The media tells us, oh, but the pathologist said it was a suicide. He hanged himself with toilet paper. And everybody just rolls their eyeballs and laughs and goes and spray paints Epstein didn't kill himself on the nearest wall or posts it on the nearest social media page. So nobody here really believes the media.
I just want to get Mimi in this on this before we're going to take a short break in a few minutes, throwing it back to London. But Mimi, before we go, I'm looking at these images coming out of Tehran. I'm looking at these images coming out of Mashhad. And I'm looking at, first of all, the emotion, the deep emotion on people's faces and the expressions. And also I have images coming from another city in Zanjan now. I think, with the emotional side, when we look at the region, Mimi, this region has suffered a lot. We look at what the United States and Saudi Arabia and Israel did in Syria. We look at what they're doing in Yemen. We look at the situation that they did in Iraq, what they have tried to do in Iran. And there has been a lot of suffering. And so we see this deep emotion and, of course, the taking of the lives of these heroes. At the same time, there is such a strong sense of determination that this will not go unanswered. I would think that actually American officials and those in the military would be extremely, extremely fearful at this point in time because, first of all, of the solidarity in the region and the anger about what has happened.
See their fear. When Trump tweets that he is going to target Iranian heritage and cultural sites, that is a sign of weakness. That is desperation. He's making outlandish and very terroristic threats on Twitter in the hope that that's going to threaten Iran to not retaliate. When you see the amount of people on the street, I'm sure people in Washington realize that retaliation is inevitable. This cannot go unanswered. And the most important thing right now is solidarity. From Syria, from Iraq, from Iran, even Saudi Arabia. The United States and Israel have been trying to drive a wedge between people, trying to get people to fight each other instead of targeting who they really must be targeting, which is Israel. Syria will stand with Iran. Iran is not alone. They have Lebanon as well, and they have Russia too. So not only that, but I would like to see in Iraq both the Sunnis and the Shiites rise up and resist the occupation if they fail to leave.
Okay, sorry that thank you so much, Mimi, and sorry we have to switch over to Tehran.